Welcome to the D&D Fitness Radio podcast, brought to you by your hosts, Don Saladino from New York City and Derek Hansen from Vancouver, Canada. In episode 3, we speak with Dr. Belisa Vranich, expert and consultant in breathing for health, fitness, performance, and recovery.
I've been working out, Don. Look
at that.
You look amazing. I have to do a quick little intro. So Derek, Dr. Belisa is a renowned clinical psychologist, public speaker, and the author of Breathe. All right. And I met Belisa, I'm trying to think, probably several years ago. She came into Drive. She started working with a lot of the trainers, a lot of the members, a lot of my pro athletes who, whatever the sport might be, golf, baseball, any profession. Yeah. Olympia competitions. And really just got them to control their breathing, which controlled their mind. And I know, Derek, this is our third episode in, and last time we covered sleep, and now we're covering breathing. We're kind of taking in order probably the most important topics here. So she's become an incredible friend of mine. She's even helped me out. I got a humbling situations. She helped me out with a few MRIs I needed in the past, and she taught me to control my breathing in situations that I wasn't really feeling that comfortable with. And I know for some reason after, and I know I'm ranting, but after, I lost several family members and friends in 2010, I started getting a little bit of anxiety of tight places. And Belisa literally even, showing up for, when I had MRI scheduled, she showed up and was there for me to help me get through the MRI appointments, which at the time were really difficult. But I owe a lot to her as a friend. And, unfortunately, Belisa and I met one of my really good buddies, Sean Perrine, who just passed away this past month. And Sean was someone I knew for several years because of Belisa. And I think in that period of time, not only became a great friend of mine, but, helped me accomplish a big dream of mine by getting on the cover of Muscle and Fitness, which was one of the last things that he did on this planet. And, I'm going to miss Sean as just one of the nicest people that I've ever met, one of the most loving people, and I feel gypped. Belisa and I were talking about it recently. I can see she's getting a little emotional as I am, but we just feel gypped that this earth only had him here for about 50 years. But we also want to try and figure out ways to carry on his legacy. And so I know that was a big rant, but Belisa and I have a lot of history. And
you can start this now with me crying. It's always
but,
Don.
This is good stuff. We should recognize in life the people who have really helped us, Derek, and the people who've helped us get from point A to point B, and we can't forget that. And I think it's important that we recognize this. And a lot of times in life, I feel like people want to, give the impression that they were self-made or did it on. I never. People want to say they're self-made. I'm not even close. I am the furthest thing from self-made. I'm not even made it yet, but I've had more luck, more breaks, and more people step up for me in tough situations. And I really just think before we start this podcast, and we can use this, but I really think that's something that's important.
That's great. I'm really looking forward to just being a fly on the wall during your guys' interaction. So I'll jump in where I can, but you guys probably have a lot to talk about as well that you can share.
Cut in, Derek. There's something that you don't know here. I'm going to cut in because I talk a lot. But so the reason why was Sean and I were really good buddies, but we were talking about doing a podcast together for quite some time. But we were both really busy with our schedules, and I couldn't really. When Sean passed, something I really wanted. No, Belisa, this is to explain to you what type of person Derek is, because Derek I've known.
Oh, I looked him up.
Yeah,
I looked him up. I know everything. I found the sex tapes and everything. Oh yeah.
Yeah. A couple months, but I feel like
that was shot on VHS too. I'm sorry.
2 turntables and a microphone. Look at that.
I love it. But when Sean passed, something that was important to me was I really wanted to start a podcast back. I wanted to start a podcast up, almost, in remembrance of Sean and to carry on that legacy and something that we wanted to do. And right after he passed, I called Derek because he was really he was the only other person that popped into mind that I wanted to do this with. So,
oh wow.
Derek, there was, it just
that's a big deal. Yeah,
it shows how highly I think of Derek. So
yeah, so I'm obviously very honored, and hopefully I can live up to
I know.
the
You're
individual
nervous
that
now,
you guys
right?
know. So
You're going to change your shirt now.
I'm just going to rip my shirt off. No. But yeah, now that we're into episode 3, like we're just jumping into some great conversations already. And I think I'm really excited to get into this one. And I know, again, another tangent that's related to Don, you did your photo shoot yesterday. And how was that experience?
It was emotional. It was, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people out there would say it wasn't a big deal, but it was a big deal for me because, this magazine, Muscle and Fitness, were one of the magazines that I used to look at as a kid. And I remember looking at guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Lou Ferrigno and Michael Hearn and, these guys that you look up to at a young age. And it's part of the driving force, I mean, even if you're becoming a strength and conditioning coach, it's something where, that physique and that level of strength and, that's something that I've always tried to portray. And it sounds funny, but it really is a big part of my lifestyle and my business. And when I found out, when Zach Ziegler, who was one of Sean Perrine's best friends, called me about it, I'd asked him. It was literally, I sounded like an idiot on the phone. And 3 times I was like, wait, you mean the cover? He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. I'm like, Muscle and Fitness? And he's like, yeah, okay. And, it was a little period of shock there, but, for me, I just wanted to go in and I wanted to represent Sean and I wanted to, and I just wanted to do my best. So I was really excited about that.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to getting a signed copy of that. But what I wanted to start with, again, we talked about sleep last time, and now we're talking about breathing. And then, I'm 48 years old, and I'm going to get a little, I'm going to turn red when we start talking about sex, but
it only gets better.
and I always joke with Don, like I coach people how to run. And these are all really simple things that most people think, well, you don't know how to sleep, you don't know how to breathe. But how complex are these things, Dr. Belisa? Like, and how do you make it something that should be natural? How do you start teaching and how do you start talking about how do we do these things properly?
So the first thing I do is I ask a question. Because if you come in and you say, I'm going to teach you how to breathe, or you need to learn how to breathe, most people go, no, it's actually one of the only things I do well. I get it, inhale, exhale. So I ask, are you breathing in a way that you think or you feel is anatomically congruous, that's biomechanically sound, that gives you a choice as far as what arousal state you want to be in, that helps your inner game and helps put you in the zone when you want to be, and that actually is part of your recovery and does regenerate you. So I ask those questions. And most folks have to go, okay, that's not what I thought I was going to be asked. I thought I was going to be asked like inhale, exhale, something much more woo-woo. But I want you to think about those things as far as the way your body's set up, your biomechanics. Are you really breathing in a way that's the way your body was built, the way it was designed? Are you satisfied with how you handle stress, how fast you can get yourself out of a sympathetic state, put yourself into a parasympathetic state, if you can do that at all? And is your recovery time really, really good recovery time that's regenerative? And most of us, when we actually really think about it and are truthful about it, is that there's other things I do well, but when it comes to breathing and actually being asked in that way, I think I could do things better.
No, absolutely. I mean, the first thing that you're triggering upon on me is that when Belisa was in town and we started working on breathing, things just started becoming corrected. It just started feeling right with the level of stress, with the way I was sleeping. With just how relaxed I was during the day. And I know one of my, I don't really go into the New Year's resolution thing, but I know one thing for the New Year's that I wanted to be really diligent with that I've struggled with in the past is meditation. And just by getting a simple app, or, I know Belisa has an MP3 that I always listen to, and focusing on those breathing, that specific type of breathing, things just started correcting on me. Like maybe that hip that was a little sore started feeling better. Maybe that shoulder that was normally a little bit tweaked got better, and things just started slowly improving. And this isn't a coincidence. This is just something where, we just don't, I think as human beings, we don't do it correctly, and we just don't do it enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Like you mentioned the word biomechanics, which I have never heard used as part of breathing, which is very interesting to me because that's, with the running, it's, I say
Yes.
biomechanics, right? You get people's
Yeah.
attention that way. And so what are some of the mechanics? Like it's funny, I was talking to Don about watching Stranger Things, and one of the comment from one of the little girl was like, "Oh, you're a mouth breather." And that's a negative connotation, right?
Yeah.
So what can you tell us about the mechanics that maybe a lot of people are missing?
Sure. Well, people don't talk about the mechanics of it, and it's because they don't have the vocabulary, or they don't have the simple way of breaking it down. And we have this idea that it's natural, so we do it well, which couldn't be farther from the truth. So the main thing when I look at it as biomechanics is really sort of how your body is set up, the architecture of your body. And then you always have to add in the psychology or the behavioral component. And that's where my background as a psychologist really helps. So you have to have those two things. And when you talk about biomechanics, you think, what muscles are we supposed to be using to breathe? And everybody says diaphragm. And they say, okay, yes, of course, the diaphragm. I'm using my diaphragm. And then you watch them breathe, and you do what I call is the BIC. It's the breathing IQ. And it looks at location of movement and range of movement. So I look at where in the body you're moving and actually how much you're moving. LOM, ROM, those are the initials for it. With most folks, they are not using their diaphragm. Their diaphragm is actually temporarily, it's not paralyzed, even though physical therapists use the word paralyzed, but it's completely locked up. So most folks know they're supposed to be using the diaphragm. They have some sense of where the diaphragm is, but it's completely underutilized, so that the muscles that we use are actually auxiliary muscles that don't do a good job. So we throw ourselves into this whirlwind of disorders that actually are based, or at least exacerbated, by our bad breathing habits that come down to terrible mechanics.
Interesting. I mean, so jumping around a little bit, when it comes to the effects of training, and there's been some different opinions that I've heard of in the past. So before a session, a competition, we want to try and get that body sympathetic. You want to try and get that body charged up, right? So there's been some different approaches, and I know what my beliefs are. I'm not going to mention them yet, but turning around and trying to get the body parasympathetic before you get it sympathetic is a bad thing, but it actually could be a good thing to get the, as you say, the diaphragm to expand, to get the ribs into a specific position. Do you have any opinion on that? What's your philosophy?
Well, for me, when you talk about it's about your choice of arousal. And most of us don't have a choice. We're completely in sympathetic, or we're in mild sympathetic, and we think that's normal, just because we've been there for so long that we don't even know what parasympathetic feels like. We know what exhausted feels like. That's not parasympathetic. There's so many people that go, oh yeah, I went to a spin class and then I slept like a rock, or I was exhausted, I was in parasympathetic. No, you're actually more in sympathetic after your spin class or your Bikram yoga. Not that it's not good, but your cortisol may even be higher than before. So if you're working out really hard, you want to be able to put yourself into parasympathetic so you can regenerate, you can get your heart rate variability together, or whatever measure you use to be able to work out the next day. So too often folks don't go into, or they're not interested in parasympathetic because they don't want to feel groggy. So I don't want to, put myself in this state where I can't work the rest of the day. And how often do I work with type A's like I am, and like I know you are, where we don't get massages and things like that? Well, because I have so much to do, I don't want to unwind because I got a lot of stuff to do. So unwinding is something that, we don't want to do. We want to continue to be productive. And still in the back of your head is this idea that, resting is, when you have free time, and resting and sleeping is just something that, is hard to schedule because it's hard to really understand the importance of it. What's nice about the meditation that I teach is it's short, it's effective, and you can do it whenever you want to. Too often with meditation, it's too hard. We now have the shortest attention span in the history of man. Right now, shortest attention span. It's even less than goldfish. Goldfish have attention span up to 9 seconds. Our attention span is about 7. Don's is maybe like 4 on a good day. So, and we're supposed to, yeah, it was from last year, right? So we have to learn how to relax in ways that are actually relaxing and that are sensitive to the fact that we are short attention span human beings. Right. So, yeah.
What you're saying is why set someone up for a program or a routine that they're just going to struggle to be successful. So, what do you recommend? How someone out there who doesn't have access to you, I mean, how do you recommend that they check their breathing, or what do you recommend that they work on? I mean, what's a really simple drill?
You know what? It's just, honestly, the simple drill is either buy or go to your library and read the book. And again, you don't have to buy it. And my publishers always get mad at me, is that I have given plenty of books out to libraries. I think people should share books. I do podcasts and I give people information because it's breathing, happened way before I was around. But what I'm doing is I'm just explaining it in a way that's different, so that you can assess yourself. So like I said, the BIC is the breathing IQ, and you actually get a grade, which is funny because people will come into classes and I'll say, well, would you like to have an assessment? Would you like to know how your breathing is? And they say yes. And often they're C or D, sometimes they're F, sometimes they're F minuses. And that's mind blowing because a lot of folks have never gotten a grade like that. They're just completely freaked out that, like, I got a C in breathing, really? And it's true. You can actually have, again, going back to the biomechanics, you can be doing it well enough, but are you doing it optimally? Are you actually breathing with the pieces of your body that you're supposed to? And are you oxygenating optimally? Are you neurologically putting yourself in a good place? So on and so forth. So getting the grade really helps. And we never had that before. And that's something I thought about very deliberately is, again, I'm a child psychologist. That's where I came from. So I worked with kids and I would run circles around them to get them to learn something. To me, it was never that the kid couldn't learn. It was that I hadn't tried hard enough to find the modality to explain something to them in. So, I mean, as you know, I can be pretty hyper, Don, is that I will sing, dance, crayon. I will do whatever it is if a kid is trying to learn a concept, a child is trying to learn a concept, to get them to learn it. And it might be that I have to sing it or color it. Who cares how you have to teach it as long as they got the concept, they felt good, success begets success, and good things start happening. So when I was looking at breathing, I was thinking, this isn't explained right, because everyone knows that breathing is important. Like, you will never have a group of people where you go, who thinks breathing is important? No one, raises their hand, or even one person doesn't raise their hand. But then how are we doing it so badly? How come people kind of know what the diaphragm is, but they say things like, oh, breathe into your diaphragm. Guess what? You can't breathe into your diaphragm. Your diaphragm is a muscle that's a dome-shaped muscle. It's sort of like a frisbee. You can't breathe into your diaphragm. So then people are thinking, oh, it must be sort of like a bag. Or you work out your lungs. You don't work out your lungs. Your lungs can't work out. They're organs. They're not muscles. So there was all these words that were just making people confused. So the way I decided to describe things is in a way that makes sense. So for instance, I never say when you inhale, the diaphragm contracts, because that automatically makes everybody confused. If I'm inhaling, why am I contracting? So all of a sudden you throw somebody into a bad breathing style by saying that. I will say the diaphragm lowers and it expands your rib cage. And then on the exhale, it narrows your body. But you will never hear me say the diaphragm contracts, because it just confuses everyone. And everything is written that way, in a way where you leave. And I know I've done a good job when people say, God, this is so simple. How come nobody ever explained this to me? And then they can never go back to breathe as badly as they did before they met me or before they read the book.
Interesting. Derek, question for you. There's obviously, you've worked with so many different runners, and I've read it, but there is a lot of research and a lot of studies showing that when a runner is running, do they want to be incredibly tense? Do they want to be loose? How much do you feel, even in a short sprint, that the athlete going into it should be relaxed, and there should be a level of pliability and a level of looseness to their body? Is breathing something that, obviously it plays a bit, like Belisa said, it plays a big role in everyone's life, but is that something that you feel you need to focus with specific runners who just might be tense in general?
A lot of the time, it's a very good question. A lot of the time, I'm trying to do things that don't make people think about it overtly, because then it becomes, like, for lack of a better word, paralyzed. So when I was taught by somebody like Charlie Francis, he never talked about breathing unless it was an issue or unless it was a problem. And there were certain people who said, well, you have to breathe now in the 100 meters, and then you have to hold your breath and you have to breathe. And then it just confused people. And I think one of the athletes, Linford Christie, told people like he didn't breathe for the entire 100 meters, right? So you hear all these different things. And I think, and that was one of the questions I had for Belisa was, how much do you make people overtly think about it, maybe as part of their training? And then how much do you say, like, just free your mind and just do it?
Well, so actually, that's a great question because, for instance, when I work with golfers, the last thing I want to do is add more mechanics that they need to do. Yeah. So the breathing, with golfers specifically, they use the breathing to not think about the mechanics. So it's actually kind of an awesome thing to learn because what you'd like to do, and Don, you know this very well, is that the last thing you want to be thinking about when you're over the ball is thinking about the mechanics. And all you have going through your head is 8 million things that you should be doing. So what's nice about the breathing is that it makes you not think about the mechanics. It's perfect.
And that helps out, Belisa, you helped me out a lot with that. With a lot of players, I mean, if you break down the golf game, Derek, I mean, your average tour player is shooting, the tour average is what, 72? So think about that. And half of the game takes place on the putting green. So, players out there swinging, 36, 40 times around. That's not a lot if you think about it, because the rest is taking place on the putting green. So there's a lot of time in between shots. Mm-hmm. But one thing that, not to mention names, but Belisa, Dr. Belisa did do with a few of my players was she really went through specific breathing techniques and mechanics from shot to shot. So they would hit their shot, and as they were walking to the shot, rather than thinking about the miss or setting this expectation, this stress and this pressure on what they needed to go through for the next shot, she had them focus on breathing mechanics. And by the time they got to the next shot, we were just in a complete calm state. And we've noticed that it has helped improve a lot of our players. So, I mean, I thought that, and there's not a lot of sports where you get that type of luxury and that amount of time.
Yeah.
Soccer, it's such a bang, bang play. Football, I'm sure you can do that stuff on the sideline, and I'm sure it would benefit a lot of the players.
Yeah.
Even with their recovery. I mean, when you have these athletes out there that are putting their bodies through this physical and mental stress is a stress, everyone. It's like training, all the stuff that we think is good for our bodies the next day pays a toll on our body. And if we did start focusing on a lot of what Belisa is talking about, I do believe the recovery and the ability to repeat day in and day out would be increased.
Well, that's a good point. I have a question for you, Belisa. If you're working with a marathoner, which is a long continuous exertion and they have to breathe, versus somebody who might be having shifts in hockey or intermittent, what's the difference there in terms of?
Oh, huge. And that's the stuff that makes me I get giddy because it's so interesting to me, is that there's breathing techniques and someone who sort of a sharpshooter or a golfer is going to be so different than a marathon runner or a hockey player. So, and then you can take all the sports, and this is what I do, is that look at jobs. So someone who is an esthetician or a surgeon or a tattoo artist is going to be more like a golfer. So what you do for work is really, and your sport is really intertwined. And then you put in personality and it gets really, really interesting. So hockey, for instance, is a great example because you are on, a couple seconds, a minute, 45 seconds on the ice hard. And you've got everything going on. You're trying to be precise as far as, where you're shooting the puck. You're making really gross motor movements. You're trying to pay attention peripherally to see where other people are. So it's really, really intense for a small amount of time. And then you go and you sit down. And not only do you sit down, you lean forward when you sit down. And that's when you mull. And that mulling, and that's part of the sports psychology of it, is you were pissed about what you did. You're watching other people play, and it's bad for you to be mulling. So the best thing then would be doing exactly what Don just said, which is that you have a breathing ritual that you do to be able to keep your body oxygenated, to not get stiff despite the bench is warm, and, to keep your brain away from, I should have done this, I could have done this, I'm mad at myself. Now, with somebody who's running, one of the first things I look at, it's a little bit different, is Are they breathing vertically, which is a term I use for using accessory muscles, it's apical breathing, or are you breathing a little bit more horizontally? With distance runners, you're always going to think about that they're using their diaphragm both as a balance and postural muscle and as a breathing muscle. But the mechanics doing this takes up a lot more energy than taking a horizontal diaphragmatic breath. So if you're running, the last thing you want to do is to be tapping into your energy by taking a breath that's energetically inefficient.
Wow. I'm wondering, Derek, my question is this: using some type of form of heart rate variability or omega wave or whatever you should, whatever would be the best way to quantify this, but I'm curious to see an athlete who's sitting on the bench, as she said, mulling. Imagine this: if Dr. Belisa was on the bench with someone in the middle of a game, putting them through breathing drills, where would they show up the next day on that heart rate variability chart? Would they be, in the red or the yellow, or would they be recovering that much more? Would their sleep improve? Right? Because it really is. I mean, I had a hockey game last night. I'm not playing in the Stanley Cup here, let's put it that way. But you're on the ice for 1 hour, and we're playing with 2 lines, and it's literally, 1-to-1 ratio on work to rest ratio. And we're out there pushing, I'm playing center, I'm pushing as hard as I can. So I'm wondering if I'm on the bench and I'm not mowing and I am focusing on breathing drills, what is that going to do now to an NHL player or a Major League Baseball player who's actually incorporating this, call it a recovery modality into their work environment, into their everyday environment of sport?
Yeah, well, my question is, even let's go beyond that. What about like an MMA fighter who's just been almost choked out, goes back to the stool, sits down on a stool and has to go back out there, and then let's extrapolate to people maybe who are in PTSD-like environments and they have to calm themselves down. Like, those are extreme examples that I like to hear about as well.
Let's talk about those, because those are you just mentioned 2 topics that are favorites of mine, which is that if you're fighting, and I'm actually out here in California, I'm working with fighters right now, no names,
Awesome.
but I'm out here, is that you have to be really on, and you have to breathe differently. It's called targeted breathing, which is that you breathe differently when you're very close, when you're a couple feet away, when you're around the outside, when you're in your corner, and between, from one day to the next. So there's a way you should breathe in every single part of that targeted breathing. Obviously, you're not taking big inhales and big exhales when you're right up on each other. You're not doing that. You actually have to stay braced. You have to breathe, but you're not going to breathe all the way out and exhale. And you have to be able to punch or strike on an inhale or an exhale. So that's very different than going to your corner. Now, what do you hear all the time? It's the one word you hear most often in every single language in any type of fight. When a fighter goes to his corner, is breathe. You hear it in every language. If you're watching Brazilians, Despida, if you're, whoever you're watching, you get down, they say breathe. And you'll watch different fighters, depending on where they come from, will do this. Or if they've been taught, or if they're heavier fighters, they'll actually do a diaphragmatic breath. Most heavier fighters tend to, especially if they come from a wrestling background, they'll take a diaphragmatic breath. But if you can actually oxygenate, calm yourself down a little bit, center yourself, get your center of gravity to be low again, focus, you can go back in again really hard. And it's that practice, and you have to practice. Going in, arousal goes up, coming down again. Arousal goes up, coming down. And that's a practice, because the last thing you want is to go into the black or have an adrenaline dump. So if you practice bringing your arousal up and down, and that's something that I do, is that then you'll never go into the black or the adrenaline dump where you start not being able to hear, time starts being different, your anger takes control over you. So practicing that up and down is fascinating. And it's exactly the breath that you should use. Too often people and sports psychologists talk about what you're thinking or what you're visualizing. That's too cerebral. We have the breath. The breath is intimately tied to your nervous system. That's actually the only way your nervous system and your CO2 knows what to do or how to put your body. So use it. And now we're doing exactly that. So the potential, Don, you mentioned the potential to have someone be able to recover more quickly, to have their heart rate variability or whatever measure you use that day And then the next day is huge, is absolutely huge,
now,
especially.
My next, and not to cut you off here, Mike, because you just made me think of something. We're talking about MMA fighters and we're talking about athletes, which is when you peel back the layers, this is a very small percentage of our population. What if we took someone right now who was sitting at a desk in New York City for 10 hours a day? And, obviously the big thing that everyone's coming to me with is, I'm getting a standing desk or I'm trying to stand. I would love to see, I understand the importance of standing, and I'm not saying I'm not saying it's not important right now, but I'm curious to look at some data here. Derek's turning me into a nerd with all this data.
I love data. I love it. Yeah.
I'm curious to see data on, what is doing the body a little bit more good. Is it sitting at the desk and focusing on belly breathing, or continuing to stand and for someone to be breathing, a little bit higher, a little bit more vertically? And obviously they both have their benefits, but it might be something where everyone's talking about the standing. Yeah. So should we be speaking about, for the people, we need to be incorporating some better breathing in too, correct?
Well, yes, except for I'm a big Jill Miller fan, and Jill Miller and Katie Bauman actually is the one who talks about desks. Both of them are into movement, and they're both amazing women who you should have on here. But Katie Bowman talks about standing desks, and she goes, it's not about a standing desk or a sitting desk. It's about moving throughout the day, is staying flexible, staying supple. So you can still be, rigid and stiff and stressed out at your standing desk, but now you're just standing. So it's not that simple. It's more about, stretch, get up, move your neck, move your eyeballs. And so it's, we love to simplify things as human beings. We like things to be black and white, and we like it to be about one choice or the other. And, sometimes you need the standing desk. Sometimes you need the sitting desk. Sometimes you need to sit on the floor. Sometimes you need to go do a handstand sometimes. Again, in your office, you can't do that. But corporate athletes are interesting because they will sit very intensely at their desk, which means focus is, incredible focus, not moving. They're really in that predatory state at work. And it's this intense predatory state where there's no moving. Because think about it. And then I do call being at your desk a modern predatory state. You're barely blinking. You're barely moving your hand. You're watching things intensely. You're not breathing either. You're not taking huge breaths. So you need to get up, decompress your body, get yourself out of that brace stance, because otherwise by the end of the day, you are completely burnt out. You haven't taken a deep breath. You've been in the black, all day long, and then you can't sleep. So if we're going to talk about sleep, we can talk about that as well, because one of the easiest ways to be able to get to sleep at night is to take those breaks throughout the day where you're focusing intensely, and then you take a couple breaths and you bring everything down. Focus intensely, bring everything down. So that way, when you go to sleep at night, your body isn't going, wait, we've been in a war zone all day and now you want to go to sleep? No way, we're not safe. It can go, oh yeah, you had moments of turning everything down during the day, so I can sleep at night. But let me actually go back to Derek. You had asked about PTSD, and there's so much PTSD right now that is not like your traditional war or rape PTSD, but it's from having seen things happen, not bringing awareness to them, not getting through them, and then having something else happen. And it can be that it's not you. It can be that you watched it happen to someone else. It can be, even that you somehow watch something on television that strikes a chord in you. You have enough things happen to you of that sort, and you don't bring awareness to them and kind of get them out of your body in whatever way you do, and you're going to put yourself in a state of mild post-traumatic stress. So what the breathing does is that post-traumatic stress is when you can fight. People talk about fight, flight, but there's also freeze. So there's three, and freeze doesn't get enough attention, but you do put yourself into a PTSD state when you freeze and you stop breathing. It's when trauma happens. So if you can actually start breathing and do what's called EMDR as well, where you move your eyes, you unfreeze your body with the breath, is you can actually, get over PTSD or feel better about it, or even what I'm thinking about is inoculate yourself against PTSD if you're able to bring yourself down. So we all know how to put ourselves in a high state of arousal, but can you go back and forth? Do you have the flexibility to go sympathetic, parasympathetic, back and forth at will? And you can practice that. Too often we think, oh, if something happens, I'll know what to do. We don't prepare. And, you know, a lot of this thought comes from folks who talk about preparedness. They talk about practicing fear, practicing being uncomfortable, not living in a state of denial that nothing's going to happen and someone's taking care of us. So, but that's a whole nother topic.
Well,
sorry, that was a super long-winded.
It's interesting. Like, I like this idea that you're talking about breathing as this almost control panel for the nervous system. And, you know, if you're going to tell somebody, like, I want you to work on breathing, are there certain times a day? Is there a certain volume that they have to do? And how's the best way to do that?
So it depends on what they're looking for. So what's really nice is that if I have somebody come in and they say, I want more endurance, my conditioning's good, my cardio's good, but I want that edge over another athlete, I want to make sure my breathing is stellar and that my breathing is better than the other person, which actually is kind of a great example, because you can have two fighters, for instance, who are excellent. The one that has a breathing muscle workout is going to be better. They're going to be better. They're going to be more centered. They're going to not gas. They're going to have better endurance regardless of their cardio. So, you know, that's kind of an interesting topic. I can have someone else who's coming in and saying, I have acid reflux and my GI doctor told me take this medicine and learn diaphragmatic breathing. And they go, well, I don't know who's going to teach me diaphragmatic breathing. You know, they try to breathe diaphragmatically. They don't do it right. They may find me. So it really depends on what you're coming in to see me for. And the range of what you're coming to see me for can span from lower back pain, GI problems, really low energy levels, and adrenal fatigue, because you've been told you're acidic and you're drinking all this alkaline water and nothing's helping. It can be that you want more endurance, or it can be that you have anxiety over speaking in public or test taking. So it's really, really depends on the person and how they're coming in. What's fantastic is that you own it. Like, I'm just going to teach you how to breathe, and then you go home. And if you do your homework and you're one of these people that's like, please give me, it's the type of person. I go to the physical therapist. I want exercises. Like the physical therapist that says, come back next week, I'm not happy. I want things to do from now until then, and then I'm going to do them obsessively because I want to heal. So that's the type of folks that do really well, because I give them exercises. They want to feel better. They want to be autonomous. They want to be able to get off their medication. They want that edge over their opponent, and they end up doing really well.
What about someone just looking to, so what would be the most common issue that you encounter? Is it just overall stress? Is it lack of sleep? I mean, you know, we're talking about performance. We're talking about specifics. You know, I know, I mean, I think it's something like 33% of the U.S. population has some type of digestive issue. So that's got to be a big one. But
huge.
What would be the most common that you encounter? And
so stress and performance.
Yeah.
But what happens is that when you ask them what their stress is, everybody feels stressed differently. So for some person, it's, I can't get to sleep at night because the committee won't let me go to sleep. Like the chatter in my head won't let me go to sleep, and I know it's related to stress. And in someone else, it may be, I know I used to breathe well when I was in my 30s. Now I'm in my 40s. I want to keep training in the same way, but like, I can't get that breath like I did when I was in my early 30s or 20s. What can I do? Because I want to keep competing. And the fact is that your breathing plateaus at age 29. So if you're not working out your breathing muscles, you are going to, you know, your performance is going to decline simply because your breathing muscles were set up, your respiratory system was set up to go up until age 29 and then kind of flatline. So you need to be doing breathing exercises if you want to have a long career. And also, I mean, all the research shows that breathing and longevity go, it sounds so funny, but that breathing and longevity go together. The Onion did this great article on people that breathe live longer. And I put it up on my Facebook page because it was so great. And, but there is, you know, some truth to that, is that the better your breathing numbers are, your spirometry, it's called your lung capacity and velocity, is that it's one of the factors for longevity. So, why not work on that? If it's pretty easy and you own it, you don't have to buy any expensive gadget. It's just about getting your diaphragm moving, and whether you're breathing this way all the time or taking breaks and breathing this way, it works.
Mm-hmm.
My question would be, one of the things that and again, being middle-aged and not as spry as Don, the one thing I hear a lot about is chronic pain, and it seems to be growing. And obviously, you could say it's attached to anxiety and other things and stress. But when I read a lot of your info, you talk about chronic pain, and I thought, well, I wouldn't have thought of breathing as being a solution to chronic pain. I think of physical therapy or exercise. Or could you talk about that?
Sure. One of the people that that all of this started from, because I got passionate about this topic because I was researching and just found people that really resonated with me about what they were talking about. And John Sarno was one of them. He talks about back pain. And then if you go into the science of it, is that there's very, very clear science that disordered breathing and back pain go together. And that it starts this vicious loop of you're in pain because of your back. You breathe in a way that's dysfunctional. The pain gets worse because of anatomy. It's just purely anatomy. And you continue to brace and breathe worse, and you're just stuck in this vicious loop. So what happens? You get painkillers. Now you're stuck in a loop of painkillers, as well, which is just a humongous problem right now, obviously. But you can actually fix pain, or at least get it to be better by breathing better. Because too often when something hurts, we start bracing, the muscles around it brace, and your back, especially your back, I deal a lot with lower back, your diaphragm is attached to your lower back. So anything that's like L4, L5 around that area, it's diaphragm and it's pelvic floor. And the pelvic floor and the diaphragm are connected by the psoas. So if you have lower back pain, definitely do the exercises. Stuart McGill is fantastic, for instance, as far as what he prescribes the exercises for your lower back. Add the breathing to it, and you're golden. It's really interesting, how most people will feel better right away when it comes to pain.
How much time on this? Take someone like myself who might be a little ADD, as you were joking around earlier. But, and I'm actually really getting into it, so I might even be a poor example. But speaking to a client, just an individual who wants to start incorporating breathing, what is the bare minimum you think someone should spend a day? That might be a really difficult question to answer, but is it just, why don't you just start with 5 minutes of it and just start developing some confidence or some routine, or what do you think?
So what it is that once you learn what I teach you, which is the vertical breath is wrong. It's not good for you. It's anatomically incongruous. It's biomechanically unsound. Then you start thinking about it. So what's really wonderful about teaching this is that once people understand it, once they understand how their diaphragm works and they understand that how they've been doing it is not right, they get a little obsessed about it. And I really believe, without getting too woo-woo, because it's not my style, is that once you understand that your body's not built to breathe that way and you start breathing in a way that makes sense, your body is really relieved. And you remember, because you were breathing fine till you were about age 5, and it actually sort of naturally progresses. I used to work for a nonprofit called the National Mental Health Association in Washington, D.C., and we would do public education campaigns. And it was super frustrating because getting people, and actually you guys know this all the time, is that getting people to do things that are good for themselves, for them is really hard, especially when it comes to fitness and diet. It's just like almost impossible. So, you have to have somebody really, a really tragic moment, a come to Jesus rock bottom to change things. And I remember we did campaigns on smoking. And one of the campaigns we did, I was like, this is never going to work. And it didn't, is that, and actually, Don, you might have seen this in the subways where it had a picture of somebody with no fingers. And she said, I used to smoke. And it showed her she had no fingers. And this is what happened to my fingers. And I kept thinking, this is never going to work because most people don't know someone that's missing fingers from not smoking, right? And it's really tough for nonprofits, especially ones that educate, to get people to change their opinion on health because, we're wired, I'm a big Rob Wolf fan, is that we're wired to eat, we're wired to be lazy and not move, we're hedonistic, we're gluttonous. So we're wired to do things we want to do. So getting people not to do them is really tough. Breathing has been ridiculously easy. And I really believe it's because your diaphragm is such a huge muscle that's in such an important part of your body, right? It's below your heart and above your second brain, your belly, that if you start using it, you just feel relieved. You feel better. And it starts making the information make sense to your brain. Your body feels better, and it sort of starts a momentum. So even if you do nothing, like even if you're listening now and you don't even do anything after this podcast, is that you'll remember that you're not supposed to breathe with your shoulders, and you'll actually try breathing with your diaphragm, which means that your middle expands and contracts. You'll never be as bad as you were before. And I say it over and over when I have a client or when I'm doing a teacher training, is that you used to breathe this way and your body wants to breathe this way. There's no other health habit that you can say that about. When you were 5, you used to breathe this way, and your body wants to breathe this way.
You know, it's funny. You start to see it. I mean, Derek, I'm not sure with your children, but I know with my kids specifically, and it started with my nieces and nephews who are a little bit older than my children. But you know, in school, just the emphasis that they put into drinking and driving, and when I'm seeing a lot of these younger kids. They're hiring Ubers now, and they're making responsible choices that, you know, much less kids are smoking than I think were smoking when I was their age, right? And it really comes down to the education. My kids already understand how bad drinking and driving is.
Yeah.
And one night, and I'm not a drinker, but I remember, I think it was like months ago, I was having a beer and my son came up to me. He was like, "All right, remember, only one, you're driving." And I started laughing. I was like, "That's awesome. I'm so happy." I was actually thrilled. I'm like, "Yeah, but that's all. I'm only having one. That's it." Right. And and then I was really freaked out about, that second one. But, one time he saw me with a cigar, and there's a point to this, because he saw me with a cigar in my mouth after a celebratory event. And my kids 3 years later wouldn't let me live it down to this day. The other day, my point is I got home and my son ran down to me and he says, Daddy, I meditated for 3.5 minutes. And he said that to me, a 9-year-old boy. And I said, meditation? I've never talked to my kids about meditation. Maybe they've seen me do it a couple times, but not enough for them to suddenly, incorporate it. And I'm like, show me how you meditate. And he literally just hit the deck, folded his legs, better at hip mobility than I would ever have in my life. Put his palms up, his fingers together, and he closed his eyes and he looked at me and goes, and the idea is to just breathe. And he said that to me. And I looked at him, I was like, he's doing it absolutely perfectly. But this stuff now that in his school and in health class, they're starting to incorporate it. It really does move the needle. And it's unbelievable how important something like this is. And as an adult, myself included, we don't know how to do the most natural thing that God gave us, and that's to breathe. We still do not know how to do that correctly. And I really think that, for a lot of us, is it too late? A lot of us will go through life not breathing correctly, stressed out. But I think it's important that we really try and establish this standard at a young age in our school systems and start incorporating this stuff, because this is going to control how we all live. And this is going to control how our grandkids, our great grandkids live. And I think it's just as important as anything else.
Well, it's interesting. The one question I had too for Belisa was, you have like yoga, you have meditation, you have, maybe Zen religion, and they all have breathing. Do people need to do that? Can they just do breathing exercises? And if they do end up doing yoga, what are some things they should focus on?
This is not related to what I teach comes from free diving, martial arts, yoga, singing, and singing. For the most part. So it's from sports. It is from yoga, obviously a lot of martial arts, but it's how you should be breathing every day. And some of the worst people that come in to see me are yogis, because they have the vocabulary. So they'll talk about, Kapalabhati and Ujjayi and alternate nostril. And I've had to answer a lot of questions about alternate nostril lately because of Hillary Clinton talking about it, is that those things are wonderful. And nose breathing is important, but where you're breathing from, if you're using your diaphragm, is, to me, so much more important than anything else. And again, you have, there's a lot of people that are, not a lot of people, but for instance, someone who's fantastic, Brian McKenzie, he talks a lot about the biochemical part of things. and CO2. And that's super interesting as well. And I love his work. But what makes me different, I guess, or at least the niche that I have, is that I'm looking at your muscles, and are you breathing in a way that your body was set up to breathe this way? And that's the point where we have to start looking at kind of evolutionary medicine to look at, we're built this way, but we're not breathing this way. So what's going on here is that, what are we doing that we're built to breathe this way, and what forces or what decisions or what myths are going on that are pushing us to not do things right, even though our organism is set up in this way to do it perfectly.
That's interesting. You talked about Hillary Clinton. Maybe that's why Trump's calling her Crooked Hillary, because she's breathing out of the wrong nostril. I don't know.
You're bad.
Derek.
But no, I think that's all interesting. Like one of the, I mean, this is one thing I want to throw in too, because I know a lot of people who work in police and fire. And actually, Don Benicio del Toro got me a book. It was called On Combat, and it was about
love it.
Yeah,
love
David
him.
Grossman, and about battle breathing and dealing with using breathing in these very hyper, violent situations. Can you talk a bit about that?
I can absolutely talk about that, because I actually spoke alongside Lieutenant Grossman at the fire department in New York about a month ago.
Awesome.
So, and it was, I was blown away, because, I mean, his work is really, really interesting. And if you haven't read the book, and actually you should get an audio, because it's chilling. Death is such an important topic. We don't talk about it. We don't prepare for it. I mean, as a psychologist, for me, it was really fantastic, because you have to prepare for it. You have to talk about it. I mean, how many people do you know, oh, we don't have pets because I don't want my kids to like have a pet die. Well, you learn about death, like, or I don't want, like, they never get to see where their food comes from. Well, if you're eating, a steak, it used to be an animal. You should know about that as well. I'm not saying you should traumatize your kids with this stuff, but death is a part of life, and we need to treat it in a way that's kind of more normal, or else it gets really warped. And that's what Grossman talks about, is that we end up getting obsessed with death in a warped way, where we're violence and television and things like that makes it get really weird. But he does mention breathing, and it was really kind of moving for me, is that he started talking about tactical breathing or square breathing. And then he said, but, I don't know a lot about the practical stuff. We have Dr. Belisa here to talk about that. And I was just blown away, because just to have him point me out, and that I now had the responsibility of teaching the practical part to that group was super cool. But he is, when you talk about tactical athletes, is that you want to be able to stay, again, he does the colors out of the black. You want to be able to hear well. One of my teacher trainers, one of my students who's actually gotten certified is a firefighter in New York. His name is Jimmy Lopez. He has a gym called Monkey Bar Gym in Staten Island. And he travels with me, and we've gone to different fire departments in the United States and in Canada to teach breathing, because with fire, not with firemen, I always get this wrong, with, what's the gender neutral for firemen? Firefighter. Okay, firefighter. I'm trying to be gender neutral. Okay, so with firefighters, is that you talk about breathing a lot. You talk about saving your tank, about breathing so that you can stay in a building longer. Right. There's something called Riley or skip breathing, which talks about the pace of the breathing, but there's so much more nuance. Once you have everything on your body, it's really heavy. It's pulling your shoulders down. If you are a vertical breather, already you're not going to be able to breathe because of all the equipment you have on you.
Interesting. Never heard about that.
And you have to be able to stay in a state of arousal that's alert, but not hyperventilating, because you'll be using up your tank, and also because you need to be able to hear. And one of the drills that Jimmy does that's absolutely brilliant is he plays a recording, and I don't know if you've heard it. If you haven't, you should look it up. It's from Black Sunday. And it was something that happened. It was a tragedy in New York, and you hear, it's all the radio contact between people and firefighters, where I think it was 6 firefighters jumped to their death. And you hear this, it's really rough. You hear it through the correspondence of the radio messages that are going back and forth. Jimmy puts people into a situation where they're working out hard, they're breathing hard. He plays that audio, and then he asks, what do you remember? What did you hear? And it's interesting, if you are not in the right state of arousal, you will not hear things right. So with firefighters, it's really important to, keep your breathing and your arousal in a certain place. And then you have to think about the fact that almost every firefighter, if they've gotten to be a seasoned firefighter, is going to have some kind of smoke damage. So you have to be able to access other parts of your lungs and really keep your breathing muscles strong.
Things that we don't think about, right, Derek?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, this is great. I mean, we could talk for hours on this, and then we still got to talk about sex at some point. So we may have to actually have a separate conversation there.
On that one, we'll be here another 3 hours. We may have to do a completely different podcast.
Yeah. Well, one final thing I wanted to ask Dr. Belisa is if I just wanted to, get ready and do something before bed, what are some simple things I could do just to kind of prep myself? If that's the time when I really want to focus and the day's done, what could I do before bed that would help me out?
Sure. Okay. So I mentioned one thing before, which is that take a couple breaths during the day. So bring yourself down during the day. And like I said, I practice this with patients, and you can practice it as well, where you close your eyes, you take a lower body breath. So it's going to look like a belly breath. And for those of us, most of us in general, we don't want to take belly breaths because for some weird reason, we think we're going to stay in that inhale with the big belly. And the fact is that if you take that belly breath and then you exhale and narrow your body, your core gets stronger. And, I have to reference, you'll really like this, Don, is that Juliana Malacarne, who's won Olympia. How many times has she won?
I think 3 or 4 times.
3 or 4 times, yeah. She's just amazing. She's got this crazy little rock star dinosaur body that's just amazing. Yeah, incredible. But remember when she came in to see me, and I don't mind telling this because she talks about it as well, and I told her to take a belly breath, she looked at me like I had 3 eyes. Nice. She had the Olympia in 2 weeks, and there was no way in hell that she was going to widen her middle. Right. So anyway, I got her to widen her middle. We did exercises. She was super psyched because she got to sweat. But then the next day she called me and she's like, it wasn't the next day, it was the next week. And she said, you know what? Now when I narrow, I can actually narrow 1/4 of an inch more, which if that's insane that she was ready to get on stage. But a week later, she was able to narrow 1/4 of an inch more because she was breathing with her diaphragm horizontally. So if you're scared of your belly, stretching out and perpetually being a belly breath.
By the way, all they're ever taught is to keep it tight, around in this flex position all day. And, you gotta be honest. I mean, they're some of the most like immobile athletes that I've seen. I mean, they just legitimately struggle to get out of chairs sometimes. Young guys who look like they should be able to jump out of a gymnasium just cannot move. And I believe it's a lot because of this. So.
Well, that's interesting because also like in athletes, they're telling them to pre-tense your core all the time and be rigid. And there's got to be some negative, implications there too.
You need both. You need to be able to, and that's what the breathing is. You inhale and you expand, and you exhale and you narrow. Don, you brought up a big point. And again, I'll mention it because he has said it publicly, but I just worked with this amazing power lifter named Brandon Lilly, 35 years old. And he came in and he's just an amazing person, both like, his heart and his soul and his body and his records, but his breathing was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. And I told him that. And he, took the information and just ran with it. And the next week was posting about how his sleep had changed, that he hadn't slept 8 hours. He couldn't remember when he had slept 8 hours, that he didn't have brain fog, and all kinds of things. I'm actually going to see him. I have teacher training happening here in Los Angeles. I'm actually going to see him and retest him now in LA. So we'll see what happens. Point being that if you inhale and expand your middle, it's okay. The belly breath is the initial breath, and it's just to get you to stop tensing your middle. On the exhale, your body narrows, your shoulders don't move at all. Later on, once you get the belly breath well, you'll be able to breathe circumferentially where your sides open up and even your back opens up. But what you're looking for is to be able to inhale and exhale where the biggest part of your lungs are, which are kind of halfway between your nipples and your belly button. So if you start breathing that way, the easiest way to breathe that way is actually on your back. It's really hard to breathe vertically, although some people do it when they're on their back. So getting ready for bed is make sure your sleep hygiene is good. I've always thought sleep hygiene sounds so bizarre, but it is the right word. In that every single light in your room is off. Every single light. Every single thing that can beep in your house is off. That you have turned, yes, even you, Don, have turned your phone off at least half an hour before you go to bed. That light in your eyes is bad, and your brain is, you're turning it on every single time you look at your phone. I am also, there's been days, and I'll admit this publicly, is that I'll get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and I will want to look at my phone, and I have sometimes, and even gone to Instagram and gone, oh, look, people like that picture. I should post something else. Don't do that. That will wake you up. So do everything in your sleep hygiene that's good. I love sound machines. You come to my house, it is freezing, dark, and there are white noise machines, but I sleep like it's my cave. So have your white noise machines. If you have to use
why is that so
earplugs, you know what? Your body, likes sleeping in that cave-like environment. It tells it, it tells it that it's okay to go to sleep. And, I'm not really sure about the physiology of why it has to be cool, but I do know that if it's cool and I'm under warm blankets, I'm happier.
I understand the research on that. I was talking more about the white noise. I was always, because I did hear specific people say that it really helps them out. I'm wondering. So
you're always listening, and it's different with men. They'll be listening because you're listening to see if anybody's coming in your house. If your family's okay. With women, we actually are constantly listening, which is really tough as well because we're listening to see if the kids are okay. So the white noise, is just telling your body nothing else is beeping. Right now, we live in a culture where there's so many things beeping all the time, and there's so many little lights in your room that you haven't even thought about. Is that we're constantly in the state of being half awake because of the beeping and the lights. So turn all that off. Once all that's off, I love earplugs. I buy these blue earplugs by like the dozen. You put them in your ears, which also stops you from hearing. And if you sleep with a snorer, it helps tremendously. And then you put something on your belly. And I always tell people, yes, you can buy a hoity-toity yoga lavender scented thing, or you can just get a bag of rice. Or black beans, because I'm Cuban, so black beans. And you put that on your belly. And it's also nice because if you roll over and you go to sleep, it's just a bag of beans that's there. You're not going to hurt yourself with a book or a weight or anything. You put that on your belly and you do belly breaths and you try to slow them down. Wow. So you may start like inhale 2, 3, 4, exhale 2, 3, 4, and then you continue. Inhale 2, 3, 4. And I'm actually going to have you guys do this now. Exhale 2, 3, 4. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Exhale, squeeze. 2, 3, 4. Inhale, really expand. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, and continue that way on your own.
It's great. Right. It's like having my own Dr. Belisa app right there.
But you can just feel it. It's unbelievable. And hopefully everyone listening towards the end of the podcast, actually, we don't want them to fall asleep on us. But I know, Belisa, can you tell everyone where they can find you and,
sure.
and where to find your book, et cetera?
Yeah, okay. So the book is called Breathe. And you can find it online anywhere. The website is The Breathing Class. Obviously, I'm not very creative when it comes to names. My Instagram is Dr. Belisa. And I've got workshops coming up. I'm kind of focusing on teacher training right now. I'm teaching coaches and trainers so they can work with their clients. But also, for instance, I've got a teacher training coming up now, and it's full of yoga instructors and life coaches and folks just that either want to deepen their own practice or they want to be able to sort of distinguish themselves from others and being able to teach. And I offer continuing education credits for for fitness instructors as well. So that's what I'm focusing on. Got a new book coming out. I can't talk about just yet, and but actually working on data. So I know that you said, you know, you're feeling like a nerd because all you're thinking about is data, but right now, one of the cool studies I'm just finishing up is looking at the exact age where kids change from beautiful, perfect, anatomically congruous, biomechanically sound horizontal breaths to being vertical breathers and messing themselves up. And we're looking at not only gender, but birth order. So it'll be really interesting to see how girls are different than boys as far as when they change, and how birth order and how their parents breathe has something to do with it. So I will let you know what happens with that one.